All righty, we'll go ahead and get started. Really appreciate everyone joining us here today and excited to chat with you all. Before we jump into it, just a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, introduction here from the Flatfile team. I'm Mike Denenberg. I lead our HCM vertical here at Flatfile, and I'm joined by Colin Fredrickson, who is the solutions engineer on our HCM team. So a couple housekeeping items. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do that at the bottom of the Zoom menu there. You should see an option for Q&A. We'll address those questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to get them in there as they come to mind throughout. One of the most frequently asked questions we get is, can I get a copy of the slides? Answer is yes. This webinar is also being recorded, so you'll get a link to the recording via email following this session. Before jumping into the agenda, I also want to give a quick introduction of Flatfile to anyone who's not familiar. So Flatfile was founded in 2018, and since then we've raised $100 million in venture funding from world-class investors like Tiger Global, Scale Venture Partners, Workday Ventures, and we're honored to serve over 500 customers. And really, all that success has been driven off the premise and problem that exchanging file-based data with customers, collecting, educating, converting, and ultimately importing data files is complex, time-consuming, and costly. And we help make that process easier for our customers and ultimately for their customers. We'll talk more about how we do that later in today's presentation, but first and foremost, want to put focus today on how many organizations today address this challenge of data conversion, areas that hang people up, considerations for how you can evolve and enhance your data conversion processes in the future. We'll also give a brief demo and overview of Flatfile towards the end to share how customers use our toolkit for providing best-in-class data conversion experiences to their customers. But before anything, just want to set the stage of what do we really mean when we say data conversion. Sometimes it's referred to as data onboarding or simply file import, but it's really about the need to import highly variant, semi-structured data from your customers in an ingestible format for your software or your systems. So traditional ETL or integration platforms like Clover, Matillion, Fivetran, these enable you to send data from a known source to a known target. And in these scenarios, it's important that you have access, control, and some system ownership from both ends, the incoming source and the destination source or destination system. And this can work and scale when you have a limited number of systems that need to exchange data back and forth, because these platforms are expecting and depending a predictable incoming format of data. On the other end of the spectrum, as it relates to data management, you might have tools like Snowflake or Databricks, and these help make sure that once data is in your database, it's searchable, queryable, and usable. But oftentimes it's simply a bottleneck just for your customers to get access to these sorts of systems beyond some sort of file-based extract. And they need to loop in technical resources on their end. And that's really that missing piece of the puzzle when we talk about data exchange or data conversion. More often than not, you're depending on your customers to provide some form of semi-structured file that provides the right data, but it's often not in the perfect format to load directly into your database. And it's often unpredictable what format it might come in. And as your customers grow and the number of systems they use within their own business grows, so does the variable nature of the data they want to share with you. So how do organizations deal with this complexity and variability? There's a couple different ways, and we'll talk about them here. Oftentimes, it's a services-led effort. There might be an implementation team with a mix of technical and non-technical personnel putting time in to make this as easy as possible for the customer. But this is human intensive, it's often a sweat-based process, and you're dependent on the availability of those team members when a new customer signs on. And this certainly takes much of the burden off the end customer, but it still ultimately requires them to be in the loop. And you can end up with iterative cycles of back and forth. And that's because there's two pieces to the puzzle. Your services team best understands the requirement of your systems, but the customer best understands their data. And that disconnect can be challenging to work through. It's difficult to scale, and resourcing those implementation teams can be a cost orientation for the business and can result in lost leadership being a requirement just to get a new customer on board. Many times, in addition to this services-led process, there's often an upfront ask to the customer that they conform their data to your specifications. You've all probably seen this or experienced it firsthand in the form of confusing Excel templates or dozens or hundreds of pages of PDF guides explaining every little detail about data rules and definitions. And many times, as mentioned, this is accompanying a services-led process with the aim of ultimately reducing the time needed for the services team that's going to execute the work. But it results many times in a poor customer experience. It's a steep learning curve, and there's a high failure rate. And almost universally, in any approach you take, there's some form of custom development required. Whether that's building custom scripts, custom applications, or interfaces. Beyond the upfront development of a solution or process, there's often a need to continuously evolve and enhance any data import or conversion solution to keep up with the changes of your software, as well as the changing needs and incoming data from your customers. And with that, there's often lag time. When we think about custom builds in the context of this space, it's not just a custom application, it's often a custom one-off script or integration. And in practice, it probably doesn't make sense to build an entire software-based integration or script for one customer, knowing that the next customer is going to have a different file format or structure. And that's oftentimes how you end up with hundreds or even thousands of Python scripts, Excel macros, and an entire recipe book that needs to be sifted through every time a customer comes on board. Beyond the budgetary dollars allocated to this sort of development, there's also a huge opportunity cost of not deploying that engineering resourcing elsewhere to something more core to the value of your product or service. So really, just to summarize all of that, and feel free to take a screenshot of this, each approach has its pros and cons, but all that said, the right place to start 3, 5, or 10 years ago may not be the right place today in order to keep up as a business. And just to put a bit more detail in terms of why we see these different approaches often falling short. One, it's confusing for end users and requires technical expertise. It's a daunting, what we would call first mile of the product experience, because it's often a subject matter expert of the business that's eager and excited to unlock the power of the software or service they're trying to load data to, but they're not a data engineer or technical expert. And that's what requires the process to be augmented with some form of services or more technical resources. It often results in these, as mentioned, asynchronous iterative feedback cycles, which create lag and delay in the overall project and can result in a loss of momentum and excitement from the customer. With the templates and just the general approaches overall, it's often rigid and requires the customer to conform. You're doing your best and trying to make it as easy and approachable as possible. But at the end of the day, you're giving the customer homework, and it's not the most straightforward task. The message is often, hey, here's how we need your data. We can get things moving once you conform your data to our standards. But as you can imagine, and as you've probably experienced, that creates a lot of friction and can slow things down. And ultimately, all of these methods provide not much more than a framework for approaching data conversion. It's hard to scale these because there's inherent nuance and variation of file-based data. It requires often significant tweaks to the process and a lot of attention, critical thinking, and solutioning from your team nearly every time a customer comes on board. So how can we make this better? Kind of, inversing everything we just talked about. The first thing is just a human-centered approach for that subject matter expert that knows what that data means for their business. They know why they want to use your software or service, but they are not a data engineer. We want to enable and empower that end user as much as possible because they're the ones most excited to be using your software or service. And with that, it's important to provide them and enable them with real-time feedback, resolution, and collaboration to avoid those iterative feedback cycles that can slow down a project. Avoid the need to go back and forth, to export, to analyze, and ultimately repeat the process over and over again. One of the key challenges with file-based import is the sheer variability of incoming data. So it's paramount to provide flexibility for that variability. And that's where the current template-based approaches fall short. Ideally, right, you can meet the customers where they're at in more of a BYOD, bring your own data approach. And yes, the data needs to get into the format of your systems, but that shouldn't be the customer's job or responsibility to get there. And lastly, to really help with the scalability of any approach is just leveraging AI and continuous learning. So one of the hurdles of current approaches is they don't scale for the myriad of sources and systems and formats customers are coming from. It requires continuous maintenance, enhancements, and tweaks to keep up with that variability. But if we do this right, we can help achieve improved CSAT and NPS. We can actually surprise and delight customers with a best-in-class onboarding experience that they haven't seen before. We're also going to de-risk the cutover of systems and provide assurance that their go-live will go without a hitch. When things get delayed, many times that could lead to the customer never going live at all, or at minimum, a delay in recognizing or collecting revenue from that customer. And as discussed, this process is often a cost center. Between the human-led services and development effort required to support these processes, being able to streamline this process can even turn what has traditionally been a cost center into a profit center. And lastly, this can even relieve sales bottlenecks. Customers have been through this process time and time again with other vendors, and they don't want to get burned. The thought of going through a migration, that word itself can be a bit intimidating, right? So giving them, cognitive dissonance to make a purchasing decision. So being able to demonstrate a new way of doing things and doing data conversion can assuage prospect concerns for making a cutover. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I want to briefly share how Flatfile can help you and your teams achieve these outcomes in your own data conversion processes. And that's what we're really all about. So we provide a comprehensive platform to build data conversion, onboarding, and import workflows for your customers. We help you enable efficiency and time savings, both for your teams, but also your customers. And ultimately, like mentioned, we help you surprise and delight them with a seamless, welcoming, and user-friendly experience in data conversion. The platform itself is a toolkit for designing these sort of workflows. We provide APIs, SDKs, and plugins to construct varying and comprehensive data conversion workflows for varying customer needs. The platform's event-driven, and it enables you to customize and automate the workflow and interactions to save both your team's time and your customers' time. Another key component of how the platform drives success is through AI assistance throughout the user experience. With all the variability across customer data, configuring a rule set or workflow for each and every nuanced edge case is often insurmountable. So we enable end users to tackle edge cases in real time through AI-driven capabilities. We're also using AI to help scale, learn, and remember how customer data aligns with your system. Lastly, and most importantly, beyond a best-in-class developer experience, we put paramount focus on designing everything in the product experience for the least common denominator, which would be that non-technical end user who's the subject matter expert. So we've got everyone from HR admins, doctors, teachers, nurses, lawyers loading data through the Flatfile platform. And with years of experience with thousands of different personas and end users, we've built a user-centric experience that provides them the tools, interactions needed so that they have the very best, easy to use and intuitive experience when going through a data import and migration journey. So I'm going to hand it off to Colin. He's going to give us a quick product demonstration here. And then following that, we'll open it up for Q&A.
Thanks, Mike. Go ahead and share my screen. So we're going to hop into our internal application. We call it hcm.show. If you're interested in experiencing this firsthand and going through a similar flow that I'll show off here, you do have the ability to access this site and create an account and go through this flow as well. There's many different flavors or ways to use Flatfile. We'll focus on the project onboarding because it seems to be the most pertinent in the HCM space today. But we also have the ability to embed Flatfile, automate some of the data import experience, as well as add dynamic aspects to the workflow as well. So what you'll see today is really just scratching the surface when it comes to that elegant import experience that Mike so graciously described. But just wanted to preface that for this demo. So in our HCM show application, we have these sets of data tables, employees, jobs, departments, benefit plans, and then employee benefit plans. When we go to project onboarding, it'll prompt us or ask us if we want to download the sample data. I already have it. And then it'll ask us if we want to set up Flatfile. At this point, behind the scenes, we're now getting ready for our data to be imported. And in this flow, we'll be accessing Flatfile as a guest. So this is purely end user experience. So I'm going to go ahead and visit the Flatfile space. And now as a end user, I'm greeted with this welcome page. So this can all be customized based on whatever the workflow looks like, or however we feel like we want to guide the end user through the process. We've had customers that add videos here, external links, provide PDF guides and documents. But for this example or this workflow, it's very, very simple in terms of, hey, here's just how you get started. So upload your file, import your jobs data, and follow this flow. And then on the side here, we're just calling out what features we're covering here. So there's a collaboration aspect as we're accessing this as an end user, as a guest in the space. But someone like Mike, if he was running this data import or project onboarding, he could access this as an admin as well. So interacting in the same space as the end user. And then throughout the walkthrough or demonstration, you'll see a lot of these other features covered. If you're curious around what's happening kind of behind the UI, the code is available on GitHub here as well. But go ahead and get into kind of the good stuff here. So we talked about the welcome page. The other piece that is actually delivered and based on the code configuration that was mentioned before is the data checklist, essentially a rundown of each workbook, sheet, and then field, and then how those fields will be initially validated. So whether they're required or unique, the type, and then a description. So kind of cool feature here just in terms of like giving a rundown instead of having to distribute like a data dictionary in Excel or the like. You now can access that in the data checklist. One other thing of note is that you'll see down here, we already have some of these departments here. When I click the button to create the space, we were able to preload the departments from the table in HCM show. So we were able to create a connection between Flatfile and the application itself, so the target system, and pull out all of the departments. And you'll see that those will be used as we move through this flow, but we've essentially preceded this data into a table in Flatfile for use later on. Cool. So we have kind of the lay of the land now as the end user. And based on the instructions here, I'll need to import my jobs data. So let me go ahead and upload this file. I in my source system, I have employees and jobs kind of generated off of the same set of data. In this Excel file here, I have a couple of different tabs. I have jobs and employees. Jobs has some of the data that I may need. It may not be in the right format or the right structure for each field, but I have something that I think is good. And then I also have a set of employees. So this is where I'll start, and we'll see what Flatfile can do for this set here. So from here, I can go ahead and import my jobs data. Since this is an Excel file, I have the potential for multiple sheets. So we'll give a little rundown here of what the sheet names are, and then I can map those to my workbook in Flatfile. Pretty easy here. Jobs and jobs. I guess I was prepped pretty well on my data. And then if I click continue, now we'll move into kind of the first place that we'll experience some of the AI inside of Flatfile. And that comes from just being able to make a first attempt at recommending how fields should be mapped. So behind the scenes, we're looking at what folks in my team here inside of Flatfile have done in terms of prior mappings, as well as just kind of pulling together some recommendations based on whether it's the name, the code that's used for the fields, and kind of blending those things together to make a recommendation and do some of the work on behalf of the end user that's importing the data. So here, ID, job code, it did a pretty good job. And here I'm actually able to override. So if something wasn't recommended correctly, or I had something special that I wanted to map, I'd be able to override that. But it does a pretty good job after a few imports of identifying and making the accurate recommendation. And you can see these incoming fields don't necessarily match up directly with the destination fields when it comes to the names or descriptions. So it actually does a pretty good job here. So we now have the ability to preview these items as well. But the first step in mapping is to map the columns. And then if I continue on here, since I didn't have any category values, it's going to then drop me into the table. And if you remember, our incoming data wasn't necessarily the most well-structured or formatted. So we had some missing job codes, and we were able to remedy that automatically on behalf of the end user with some logic in our configuration. So we were able to populate the job code based on the job name. Those crazy date formats, they have now been restructured to year, month, date. And then we've also done some mapping in relation to the Boolean values here as well. So we still have some cleanup to do. We still have 8 invalid records. So go ahead and filter those down. These are pretty simple to fix. So I'll do some one-off fixes here. Copy paste in the table. I can toggle this on, and that will actually remove those records from the sheet here. But now we have some issues with the job department, and this is because these values don't exist on the department sheet here. So some of the referential integrity here is a little shaky, apparently, based on the data. Since the departments were pulled from HCM show, we're treating that as a source of truth. So we need to actually address these items here. So I'm just going to go ahead and see what is available here. We'll just move the FA logistics to FA administration, and that one goes away. And I'll go ahead and just do this a few different times. And this kind of seems like it may be repetitive. So let me just go ahead, wait for that to clear. And then I don't necessarily want to go through and click all of those items there. So let's go ahead and find and replace. And let's see what CS call center does here. And then I'll just do CS customer service, replace those. And now we have cleaned up data for our jobs. So there's a number of different ways to approach the cleaning up of data. We have some of the automatically generated items, as well as some of the manual intervention. So now that we've cleaned up our jobs data, we can move on to the employee stuff. So we go back in here, I'll re-import or work through the import for employees. This one, the mapping is pretty good on this one, but there is one bonus item here, which is the enum values. So when it comes to like pick list options that may exist in target system, we'd be able to pull those values in and allow them to be mapped. We could do that on the fly as well. So if at the time that we're creating our space and our workbooks, we wanted to also reach out to HCM Show, for example, and get the options that are configured for employee type, we'd be able to do that as well. But for the moment, we just have these items to map, and I can continue on here. So the same theory applies where as we move this data into the table, we have some additional validation items that have occurred and that we'll need to address. A couple of cool or I guess validations that are a little bit different here is we have some of the uniqueness checks for employee ID. We have an external API call here that says that this employee ID already matches in an employee ID inside of HCM.show. And then we have some manager IDs that don't exist in as employees. So we can go ahead and work on resolving those. We've also created the first name based, or sorry, the full name field based on first and last name. And then we have some of that referential treatment where we have an effective date for hire that actually is before the effective date of the job on the job sheet. So lots of in-depth validations and potential transformations that can be done on the data here. And we also have the ability to warn the user, in this case, that the job is inactive. So lots of cool, I think, value add validations that we typically see in these types of projects, whether it's referential, whether it's the checking of dates. But yeah, that's the validation piece. And say that I had multiple or many duplicate records here. So say I had a file that I was that had kind of piecemeal data or had specific updates to certain records. I could then potentially remove duplicate employee IDs. I could also build out an action on the sheet, which would take into account all of the records in this sheet and validate the reporting structure to ensure that that is solid. But for the moment, let's go ahead and see what happens when we attempt to remove duplicate records. So it'll check the sheet for duplicates, and then it will run a check against the records in the sheet. and then it will remove those duplicate records. So this one here doesn't have a specific like success message or outcome that could be added to communicate what records were deduped, what values were kept. We'd even have the ability to specify in that action which records we would want to keep, whether it's the most recent, the oldest, what field we want to merge on. There's a lot of real cool functionality when it comes to putting some of the onus on the end user to make a decision on how to handle some of this data. Let's go ahead and see where our major issues are. And it looks like we have some issues with the manager ID, which we can see there. But the main issue here appears to be with the password field. So I'm able to work through the invalid records, kind of scroll over here and just see that like we didn't really get a password for any user here. We don't really have the option here to like find and replace, filter by value, replace empty values. We may want to take this up another level in order to generate a password for these users. So we have this concept of transform, and this really puts a lot more of the power in the hands of the end user. And kind of getting back to Mike's point or earlier about like not having to like rewrite scripts or handle one-off use cases, this transform piece here would allow us to kind of leverage some of the plain language instructions to address these validation issues. So if I go ahead and click transform here, I will get a preview of the data in its current form. And then I will have the ability to prompt the system here to transform the data. So if I wanted to say, let's set the password, set password with a random strong password. Let's see what happens. Didn't like that one. Let's see what this does here. Cool. So I had to refine it a little bit, but now I'm able to transform the data or view the update here and populate that password field with a random password. I have the ability to only show the modified data, but let's go ahead and transform this. And then you'll see that we now have the password field here as well. So another aspect of just the AI piece that we've started to incorporate into the product, mainly focused on the data cleanup and the ability to account for kind of those scenarios that we may not typically see in conversion, but definitely we want to account for in the overall process. So we covered the validation engine, we covered the actions at the sheet level, we covered some of the AI pieces. The last piece here, we could continue down the path of cleaning up the data, but I think this is a pretty good representation of the process. The last piece here is I then have the ability to submit the data. So this will send the data back to the HCM show application. And then from there, I'd be able to then see my jobs and employees in the application itself. So we get the message that the job is completed. If I go back to HCM show, we now have all of our employees loaded in, and then all of our jobs loaded in as well. So the workflow, this is a pretty straightforward workflow. To be honest, we've also built out workflows that are much more complex that include things like notifications, diff views between files that have been submitted, um, a lot more of the actions. So whether it's summarizing data, doing some of that analysis, as kind of was alluded to in the reporting structure. But there's really uh, a lot of really cool things that can be done to solve a lot of the data conversion issues, whether it's the data integrity, the validations, some of those transformations that customers can never seem to get right. A lot of that can be solved inside of Flatfile. So that's the end-to-end flow of just this demo application. There's definitely a lot more that can be done. But Mike, I'll pass it back to you if you want to kick off the Q&A.
Thanks, Colin. I hope that was helpful for everyone. I know it was high level. We'll open up the Q&A if you haven't already, and if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in there in the Q&A section. So I'll give just another moment or so here to let folks get those in. Thank you for submitting. Go ahead and start answering. Got a question here about what sort of skill set or programming language is needed for using Flatfile. From the end user perspective of what everything Colin just showed today, it's pretty much, there's no specific skill set, but I'd say basic familiarity with spreadsheets. Everything you saw Colin do just now is what an end user would be doing in their interactions with the product. But from an admin and configuration perspective, the platform is configured with a JavaScript and TypeScript SDK. Also good to have some familiarity working with APIs. All that said, we do have customers that don't necessarily have development teams or aren't able to immediately allocate and assign development teams to configuring Flatfile. And we do have integration partners and also offer managed services for building and maintaining your Flatfile configuration for you. Another question here around data storage, I think around where this data is being processed and stored. So in our standard deployment, this is running on Flatfile's cloud and AWS instance. That cloud itself, our cloud, is SOC 2 Type 2 GDPR HIPAA compliant. All that said, we know that folks have different hosting and data security and privacy requirements. So we offer a variety of hosting models in addition to our standard cloud, everything ranging from running this within your own cloud environment to regionally hosted clouds and custom retention policies. Question on file types supported. Colin, you mind taking that one?
Yeah, in terms of the file types that are supported out of the box, it's natively supporting CSVs. There are a number of plugins that do support other file types. The most popular seems to be the XLSX, which you saw highlighted here. I believe we also have a XML as well as like a pipe delimited, and there is a early version of a PDF out there as well. But those are built as needed by the plugin team here at Flatfile as well. And I know we've done some custom builds for based on request.
Thanks, Colin. Got a question here from Steven. Thanks, Steven. Steven's interested in hearing more about the error validation checks that are pre-built in Flatfile and how often are those updated with new ones. I might let Colin pepper in additional detail on my initial response to this, but most of the core primitive validators are for basic common things in terms of the format of the data type. Is this a date? Is this a number? Is this a multiple choice or multiple select? And then everything on top of that is really configurable. And that's really where any sort of custom logic to your business or specific business rules, we don't want to take an opinion on what those might be. And that's where we make it configurable with the SDK and API. But there are certain things that are being added to the experiences with some of those core primitive validators. So things like multi-select or conditional selections across fields, that sort of thing. Any other detail you'd add to that, Colin?
Yeah, in terms of the validation checks, we continue to build those out. We've rolled out a newish feature that is actually called external constraints. That's a lot more flexible in terms of how we validate at the field level, very similarly to like the required as well as the unique checks. You can now put an external constraint, which could like do things like the date checking, the length checking, and even pull in things like from the Workday target schema as well. So I think in your example, like if there's a way that we would be able to tap into like the WSDL or get additional information from that and kind of make it a seamless process to pull the structures from Workday and then interpret kind of the constraints for those fields. And also you saw the reference fields as well. All of that could be incorporated into kind of the end-to-end flow for Workday. And then that would be considered like something for the specific target system.
Thanks, Colin. Another question here in terms of any sort of what sort of out-of-the-box integrations or plugins are offered as part of the platform. Do you mind taking that, Colin?
Yeah, I think the area, at least for the plugins, I'm just going to pull up the plugin page right now. Kind of where we focused our time and energy so far is on like the extractors. So we covered some of those, whether it's like the few that I neglected to mention was like a zip extractor as well as JSON. And then so we've kind of had these buckets of plugins, the extractors, the transforms, which we saw for some of the validations here. Export. So if for some reason we wanted to export the data from Flatfile into whether it's a Excel workbook or send the data to a webhook, that's there as well. And then the other piece would be schemas. So how we generate the Flatfile schemas themselves. So the target ideal state of data. And right now we have the JSON, the YAML, and then the OpenAPI plugin. So we've kind of had those buckets so far in terms of where we focus our time. And that's more of like what would be kind of outside of Flatfile. And internally to Flatfile, we've also built out things to make the configuration a little bit easier. So things like the space configure, which was created directly based on feedback from customers of, hey, we're doing our space creation process over and over. Can you help us build a plugin for that? And then also similar to that, job handler as well, which kind of standardizes like how jobs are executed, completed, and failed inside of Flatfile. So I think it runs a gamut between like, hey, what are we hearing in the data conversion space, and then how can we make the configuration a little bit less intense based on what we hear from our customers.
Thanks, Colin. We'll close it out with that. But once again, want to thank everyone for joining today. Really appreciate your time and interest in this and hope to speak to you soon. Thank you.